Merry meet. So, being able to enter the alpha state can be a key goal of our magical practice. When we're able to change our consciousness at will, it will not only aid our spell work, our rituals, and our magical practices, but it also allows us to connect more deeply to the higher self and makes it easier for us to receive messages coming in from the universe. So, from breath work to meditative techniques to body movement, there are a variety of different ways we can alter the state of consciousness. So, Merry Meet, I am Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and tonight we are here to talk about 8 different ways to alter your consciousness for magic. So, welcome to those who are joining us live. I see we've already got some people in the chat. I see Kurt is here in the chat. Welcome, Merry Meet. So if you are with us live, you can leave questions and comments in the chat. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. And even if you're not with us live, if you're watching this back in replay, you can also leave questions. And I go back later and answer the questions that people have left. So we are going to dive right in, and there is a lot to talk about tonight. So we are going to start with why would we want to alter our state of consciousness in the first place? What benefits does it have? How can we do it? We'll talk about 8 different techniques, as I mentioned. Some you may be aware of, and some may be new to you. And so the goal is hopefully after the end of tonight's episode, you'll leave here feeling like you have some idea of how you could alter your consciousness and how you could use that in your magical practice. All right, so one of the best ways that we can strengthen our abilities as magicians, as spiritual workers, is to learn how to alter our brainwave patterns. So, we're not going to get into a ton of science today, but we do need to talk a little bit about wave patterns. So, most of our waking time, we are in the beta state. And so, just briefly, what that means this is a state of awareness where we are aware of what we're doing. We are vigilant. We're not necessarily hyper vigilant, but we're vigilant. We're able to engage with any stimuli that are coming in, any threats that may be coming into the environment as well when we're in this state. And we are at a high level of cognitive activity. So, this is where we would be in a thinking state. Now, this typically happens when our brainwave patterns are between 13 and 25 hertz or cycles per second. Though some sources will say 13 to 30 or even 13 to 32 hertz or cycles per second would be considered the beta waves. Now, alpha waves, which is really what we're mostly going to be talking about today, is when we have slightly slower brainwave patterns. Now, we're still awake and we're still very much aware of what we are doing, but we're in a much more relaxed state. And this is slightly below the beta wave state. Alpha is between 8 and 12 hertz or cycles per second. And when brain scans are performed on people who are in the alpha state, what we see is there's more intense activity in the occipital lobe. So, this is at the back of the brain, and this is where your visual cortex is. And this is especially true when the eyes are closed. We still see activity in this area. And so, when we talk a little bit later, we're going to talk about meditative techniques. And one of the techniques that's very popular in the West is guided visualization. And so, guided visualization, even if you're someone who has trouble with visualization, guided visualization can be a good skill to continue to practice because it does stimulate this occipital lobe where our visual cortex is. Now, during magic, if we can achieve the alpha state in some way through our own will, not through just happenstance or chance, but through our own manipulation of our energy, then we will find ourselves better able to connect with both the things that are outside of us, so anything coming in from the universe, our guides, our higher self, but also all the things that are within us, which would be those things contained in our unconscious, which makes it easier for us also, not only in our spell work and our magic, but also in our shadow work, because when we can connect more deeply into our unconscious, we're more able to hear what's below the surface and bring it up into our awareness so that we can process it. Because when things are hidden from us, they are not really able to be processed in the same way. So essentially, what we want to do, if as we are becoming better at magic, as we are increasing our powers as witches, is to get really good at changing our brainwave patterns at will. And so that's what we are going to talk about today. So if we want to know how to change our brainwave patterns, then we really need to think of and understand what the brainwave patterns are, what they're about. So while the human brain itself is physical, the mind itself is mental energy. So this is energy like any energy in the world and if in the universe. And if we as witches know how to manipulate energy, then we certainly should be able to figure out how to manipulate the own energy in our bodies, within our minds. Now, the energy of the mind takes form in waves, like we've already started to mention alpha waves, beta waves. And when we have trouble focusing or getting into a ritual or magical working, one of the keys here can be figuring out how to change those brainwave patterns. So if you've ever been to a ritual, I certainly know that I have been to some, that I find myself more easily able to get into the sacred space or the ritual state than I can during other times. Now, during the times that we can't really get into it, it's usually because we are not able to get into that alpha state. We're still in that beta kind of waking state. So when we can move out of the beta state, when we're able to intentionally move our energy, the energy of our minds, into a different state, this is where we're going to find ourselves more receptive, more creative, and more able to visualize what it is that we want, what we want to achieve, our desires, our goals. Now, sometimes, depending on the type of work that we're doing, we may want to even go more deeply into our conscious state than even alpha. So I will be talking about this in a bit, but we may want to go slightly deeper into the theta state. Now, the theta state is below alpha. It's at 4 to 7 hertz or cycles per second. And it's like a light sleep. So when you are in that state, when you are still awake but not asleep yet, we call this the hypnagogic state. It's that state between sleeping and waking. And you may notice when you are falling asleep and you enter that hypnagogic state, you may notice visualizations. There may be more going on in your mind when your eyes are closed. You see imagery, right? You may hear voices. You may receive messages. You may feel that you are in touch or in contact with perhaps people who have crossed through the veils, or your guides, or someone who isn't present there in the room with you. And essentially, what you are doing in the hypnagogic state is you are passing from beta, the waking state, into alpha, and then further into theta, which is where we're really in that more deep meditative state. We're much more receptive here. If anybody has ever done yoga nidra, which is a special type of meditation, theta is a goal of yoga nidra, is getting us into that more deep state. And in fact, we'll talk about this in a little bit later, is this is really the brainwave patterns that we want when we're in a trance-like state. So I'm just going to pause for a second, and I'm just saying hello to those who are joining us. It's very strange how like I can't see everybody, and then I click a couple buttons, and now I can see more people in the chat. See Jamie's here, Mary Meet, and Amy and Andrea. Tommy's here, Nancy, and I see Carla Anaya. She's here. So Mary Meet, everybody. So we are going to now talk about what are we really aiming for during ritual. So during our ritual, during our magical workings, we're aiming for the alpha or the theta state, kind of depending on what type of work we're trying to do. If we're trying to do spell work, we're probably looking to be in the alpha state. And like I said, if we're trying to do more deep trance work, perhaps you're trying to connect to guides, your higher self, then alpha state's also very good. But you may also be aiming to get a little bit deeper into the theta state. So we have to figure out, how do we slow the brainwave patterns down? How do we slow our brain down? Now, regular meditation is a key to this. And we will be talking about meditation. Meditation isn't necessarily what we think. Sometimes we think that meditation is, closing our eyes and clearing our mind and being in this Zen-like state. And that is one definition of meditation. It's one form, but it isn't the end all be all of meditation. And we can certainly use meditative techniques to lower ourselves into alpha and into theta, into these deeper brainwave patterns. Um, we can use meditative techniques, but it doesn't always have to be that clearing of the mind that we sometimes think it has to be. So it's important to remember guided visualization, which is very popular in the West, mindfulness, even like the mindfulness that a person can achieve when they're cleaning. We're going to talk about that. That can be used to alter our state of consciousness. You may have noticed that you have great ideas. You're more creative when you're cleaning. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Now, Zen meditation, and we will talk about that. That is where we kind of clear our mind. That's more of the traditional meditation that most people think of when they think of meditation. But even movement meditation or candle gazing can be important ways for us to be able to achieve that alpha state, especially when traditional meditation hasn't worked. To me, the most important thing for people is to find a technique that works, and it's not a one size fits all. Now, there may be more people who find guided imagery meditation easier, but that doesn't mean it's the only way, and it doesn't mean it's the best way for you. And you'll really only know what's best for you through trial and error and trying some of the different techniques. So let's, if you want to, we will be talking about meditation in just a moment, but I'm going to put a video in the chat for anybody who missed it. This is about like 10 months ago, I guess. I see on the YouTube. I did an episode on meditative techniques for witches. So I'm putting that in the chat here. Those who are watching back on YouTube later, that link will be below the video in the description. If you want to check out more ideas for meditation, more than we're going to be able to discuss in tonight's episode, then you want to check out that video. And I see that Jamie in the chat, she said the easiest for her way for her to get into a meditative state is writing. Yeah, so for everybody, it's going to be different, and that's really the key. And I hear all the time people say like meditation doesn't work for me, and I always answer with you just haven't found the right type of meditation. And 9 times out of 10, the meditation that isn't working for them is the traditional form, and they just haven't. No one's told them that they can look beyond that. So, so before we get into more deeply into the techniques, let's just talk about, why do we want to enter this state? Why would we want to get into the alpha state? The alpha state itself can feel a little bit like beta. There's a very fine line between it, especially if you think about how the beta state is 13 to 32 hertz or cycles per second, and alpha is 8 to 12. So when you're in that 12 to 13 range, these two states feel very, very similar. And as you can tell from the numbers, alpha is only very slightly below beta. So we're still awake. And so sometimes people don't even realize that they're in it until they do enough of these techniques. So when you start to try these techniques and you find yourself in alpha, you're going to notice that very slight difference. It feels a little bit different for everybody, but over time, you can actually train yourself where you can literally just close your eyes, and because you have done the techniques enough, you've done enough practice, you can close your eyes and you can be in alpha immediately. And for me, I practiced meditation and meditative techniques for close to 30 years, and so absolutely, like, I can literally close my eyes and be an alpha. But those of you who find it hard to shut down the brain, you'll want to practice some of the techniques and find ones that work best for you. Now, many people will say that alpha allows us to enter the path of gnosis, which is knowledge and knowing. And it's not the knowledge of this world. It's not knowledge of books and chemistry and math and literature. It's the gnosis, the knowledge of the universe. So alpha allows us to tap into that, to tap into the universe, so that we are more connected to the true source of knowledge, which is the universe, the creator, source, God, goddess, whatever we choose to call it. Now, alpha is also often called the state of ritual consciousness because, again, this is the state we want to be in during rituals, during magical workings. And like I mentioned, there are many ways to enter this state. And so tonight we are going to talk about 8 different ones. Some of these techniques are ones like meditation and breath work that you've probably heard of, though we'll talk more specifically about how to use them to achieve gnosis or to achieve ritual consciousness. And then some of the techniques may be ones that you've never heard of, and they may be ones that you choose to never try, but at least you'll have the knowledge and you'll understand the different ways that you can enter the alpha state. So, all right, so let us dive in here. Now, some of these techniques are inhibitory, which means that they slow our system down. They will, in particular, they're going to slow the energy in the body down. And then some of the techniques are excitatory, which means they're going to speed up the energy of the body. But the result in the mind is going to be the same, and that is to bring the brainwave patterns down into that alpha or even into that theta state. Some of the techniques will feel like they could be both in both categories, excitatory and inhibitory. Now, the excitatory techniques will feel like they're stressing out the system, but you will find your way into a more gentle state immediately afterwards. And it's kind of this idea, like I was mentioning this during, I think it was a yoga class for our Shadow Seekers membership last week, and I said that some of the techniques in yoga and in breath work and kundalini, they're meant to stress out your system. So when you do these like power moves or these power holds, you're holding in these poses that are kind of difficult to hold for a long period of time, or you are doing these breath techniques that are kind of difficult to keep up with over an extended period of time, your body gets stressed out. And after you stop the techniques, your body goes back to being not stressed out. And so, what you're essentially doing is you're training your body that when stress comes, it's followed by relaxation. And that's really important because if you train your body to expect that, like every time I'm stressed out, it's followed by some kind of relaxation afterwards, you also begin to train your mind that when your mind gets kind of amplified and stressed out, it can return back to that more relaxed state. And so that's sort of the idea of these excitatory techniques, is they stress us out so that we return back to actually a deeper state than we began in. Okay, so the first technique we're going to start with is meditation. The reason we're starting with it is the one most familiar to people, and it's probably the most popular technique. So like I mentioned, I'll talk about it briefly here because there's only one aspect of the episode. And if you want to learn more, you can go into the chat and you can find the episode on meditative techniques for witches. You can watch that later on. Now, it is an inhibitory technique, which means it's bringing the system down, and the mind is relaxed. As the mind relaxes, the body also relaxes, and we have multiple different bodies. So we have our physical body, we have our energetic body, we have our mental body, our emotional body, and then we also have a body that is, in Sanskrit, we call it the Anandamaya Kosha. It's the bliss body. It's essentially the soul, the part of us that connects outside of us to the things outside of us. It's the part of us that will remain once the body dies and begins to disintegrate and return to the earth. And so as our body begins to relax, our physical body begins to relax during techniques like this, it makes it easier to tap into these other layers of our being, these other parts of our body, like the energetic body, the mental body, the emotional body, and then eventually the soul, the bliss body. Now, the Eastern technique, the Eastern technique that's most popular when it comes to meditation is about clearing the mind. This is called Zen meditation, and I'll explain it here briefly, and I explained a little bit more in that other video. But Zen meditation is what many people think of as traditional meditation. It's a clearing of the mind. Now, the technique in Zen is oftentimes counting. So a person will find a relaxed state, and usually that is sitting upright, but the key is really about having the spine straight. So even a person who can't sit upright could always lie down and still have their spine straight. And you take some deep breaths to kind of relax yourself, and then you begin to count. And so you count from one up to 10, and then you can count from 10 back down to 1, and you can change different patterns, but the one that I like to use is 10. And the idea here, though, is that as you're counting, obviously you're focused on the counting, which is great because it means it's harder to think about the other things that as your mind begins to wander. But what you may notice is that you start to count and you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now you're thinking about what you're cooking for dinner, or you're thinking about what you're going to wear to work tomorrow, and this is common for everybody. So don't feel like when that happens to you, it means that you're bad at meditation, because it's common to everyone. But the idea in Zen is that if you notice that your mind has started to wander, then you start back at 1 and you count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now you get to 6 maybe, and now you're thinking about, did I take out the garbage? And and so then you go back to 1, and you just keep doing this until you train your mind to stay more focused on the counting, which is what essentially clears the mind. And then the idea is that you want your mind to be like this sort of pool that doesn't really have any thoughts in it. And the idea behind it is, like, if you think about, let's say, the moon shining on water, if the pond is still, we can see the image of the moon very clearly. But if there's waves, then we're not going to see it. It's going to distort the picture, the image of the moon. And so this is the idea behind this kind of expanded consciousness meditation and the counting Zen meditation that can help get us there. But it's not always the best form of meditation for everybody. And so if a person tries it and it doesn't work and they say, I can't clear my mind, then they're likely to just kind of give up. So there are other meditative techniques that we can try. Like in the West, the most popular one is probably the guided meditation, and this can help people because they have a script. There's a script they're listening to, and someone's guiding them through it. And I always tell my students and the people who come to my rituals that if you, even if your mind wanders during guided meditation, you're still getting something because the unconscious is hearing what the guide is saying. So that can be a really powerful form for people. Insight Timer is an app that I highly recommend. If you don't have like a regular meditative practice, try it. Insight Timer has a lot of guided meditations, as well as you can just set a timer with some music and you can just do open awareness meditation. But at least with these guided meditations, there's many different topics. You choose one that you're drawn to, and you listen to it. And I always say, just find a person's voice that you enjoy. Again, like I said, check out that previous episode on meditative techniques for witches if you want to learn more. But to me, 5 minutes of meditation on most days, if you make this a regular practice, can be highly effective. Can be a big game changer. People think that they have to meditate for 15, 20, 30 minutes and get really good at it to have an effect, and it's just not true. And that keeps us stuck, and it keeps us blocked, and it just is an excuse to not do the work. So I think anybody can find a way to spare 5 minutes, even if you just have to shut the door to the bathroom behind you and just sit in there and meditate for 5 minutes. We all can probably find that space somewhere. So now remember, your meditative practice doesn't have to be perfect. If your mind wanders, so what? It's a practice. You're practicing it so you get better at it. And if your mind wanders, you just sort of bring it back to the present, and you can try different techniques if the one that you're working with just doesn't work. So, so that is meditation. And like I said, and what we're also gonna find is that we can stack some of these techniques as well in order to help facilitate our altered state of consciousness too. So the next one can easily be stacked with meditation. We can do this together, but the next technique is sound. So sound can be inhibitory or excitatory, all depending on the technique that we're using or the type of music that we're using, if we're using music. Now, sound can include singing, it can include chanting or mantras. Now, in the West, we will often say the word mantra, even I do it, to describe just like affirmations in English. But mantras are usually, by definition, we're talking about specific sequences of syllables in Sanskrit as one language. It's very vibrational. It has an effect as we say the sounds and we repeat the sounds. They have a meaning to them that we are kind of putting out into the universe, but they also have a vibrational effect that changes the body. It changes the energetic composition of the body, and that's why they're so powerful. But we can do mantras, we can chant those mantras, or we can sing those mantras. We can use seed sounds. So seed sounds is another form of mantra meditation or a mantra technique. Seed sounds are syllables that contain the energy of an idea. And so there are seed sounds for all of the chakras, for example, that you can use to do a quick reset of your chakras. And there are seed sounds, for example, the seed sound gum, which is it's spelled GAM, but it's pronounced gum, is the seed sound of Ganesha, and it basically contains the essence of the energy of Ganesha. Now, as the remover of obstacles, the seeds Ganesha is the remover of obstacles. So the seed sound gum is, you can chant that, you can intone that to remove obstacles from your path. Another seed sound is Shreem, and it is spelled Shreem or Shrim, depending on the translation. And this is the mantra, the seed sound of the goddess Lakshmi. Now, as the goddess of fertility and abundance and wealth, when we intone the seed sound Shreem, we draw in the energy of wealth and abundance to us. And so these mantras can be very powerful ways to not, they're like, to me, they're spells in and of themselves, but they're also very powerful at bringing us down into the alpha state and altering our state of consciousness. So you can chant those before a ritual or before a magical working to put yourself into that state of consciousness. So other forms of sound that we can use to alter our state of consciousness is drumming. Anybody who's ever been to a drum circle probably knows that it's very, you get swept away in the energy of it, and that brings you into that trance-like state, which is altering your consciousness, is exactly what we want it to do. Singing bowls can be another way. They're very powerful. They're very healing. The tones can actually heal the physical and the energetic body, and then at the same time, bringing us down into that energetic state that which is our goal, that alpha state or even that theta state, and altering our consciousness. So, as you let yourself be swept away by music, so let's say trance-like music, for example, you you will enter that altered state. And so this is what's really important here, is for people to find the right music that speaks to them, that allows them. You'll kind of know, like, as you do these practices more, as you get better at meditation. Some of you probably already know what alpha feels like, but for those of you who don't, again, it's just a very slight difference between the waking state, between beta and alpha. But as you practice it more, as you get better at it, you're going to know that very subtle difference, and you're going to know what music kind of resonates with you. And so if you play some music and all it does is it sort of stresses you out, or it causes you to be like more in an agitated state, then it probably isn't the type of music that we want for this. So it doesn't mean that the music we're looking for has to be slow by any means, but we do need it to be, we need it to bring you into more of a relaxed state, a more present state, a more centered state, a more grounded state, essentially the state that helps us connect and receive. So that is sound. And before we move on to the next idea or technique, I will mention too that sound is very important. Whether we create it or not, it still activates the throat chakra. When we create it ourselves and we use our own voice to speak or to sing or to chant, we are activating that throat chakra to a very great extent. But even when we listen to music or we listen to sound or drums or singing bowls, we are also still activating that throat chakra, which is a chakra of creation. And so, especially since we're talking about magic and rituals and trying to be more effective at doing those things, working with our throat chakra can be a great aid in that. So if you know that you want to work with your throat chakra, then bringing sound in as a consciousness altering technique would be a good choice for you. Okay, so let us look at the next technique, which is body movement. And I see Tommy in the chat. He said meditation is a daily part of his spiritual practice. Yeah, and it's a good go-to for a lot of people. Because like I said, it can be simple, and we only have to do it for 5 minutes to start. And you may find what I find is kind of interesting about spiritual practice is that if you start out with a few minutes, even if you start out with like 2 or 3 minutes, somehow you magically find time to do more. It's kind of interesting the way time works that way. Okay, so let us look at the third technique, and this is body movement. Now, body movement is going to be an excitatory technique. Here, you have many different options here. So one option would just be simple intuitive movement. Here you can bring in some music. Find music that you find relaxing, that's going to help you get into that deeper state of consciousness. Close your eyes because that will immediately kind of activate the occipital lobe where the visual cortex is. And then let your body begin to move to the music. And it's really better if there aren't other people in the room and your eyes are closed and you're not looking in a mirror. This isn't about how you look, it's about how you feel. And you let your body express itself in the way that it needs to. And sometimes, I've been doing this technique for a while, but sometimes if you have some stuck and stagnant energy in a part of your body, like let's say in the low back or in the neck or in the arm, and you begin to do this movement, you may find that you dislodge some or all of that energy. And sometimes what I will do too is before I go into a place where I'm going to be doing some intuitive movement and getting into that state, I'll just set an intention that maybe I even know that I have some energy in my left shoulder that is stuck and I'm not sure what it's about, and I want to let go of it. And and then I set an intention that I find the right movement to help me dislodge some of that stuck and stagnant energy. And then I start the intuitive movement. And sometimes I will find exactly how to let that energy go. And it can be really a real big game changer for people who are just carrying around a lot of stuck and stagnant energy, don't know how to move it. And they find this technique. So I think intuitive movement is fantastic. It taps into your sacral chakra. It is very good for your emotions, releasing emotions as well. It's not uncommon for people who've never tried it before, and then they try it for the first time, and they may find that they start to cry or weep or let go of some emotions because it's just so good at getting into those other parts of our body, the energetic body, the mental body, the emotional body. Now, besides intuitive movement, you can also do intuitive dancing. They look very similar. I would call what I do intuitive movement because I don't consider myself a dancer. But, if you're somebody who dances, just letting go and doing some intuitive dancing can be a highly effective way of achieving the altered state. Other things that you can do are things that we might not normally think of as magical, but walking, running, or hiking. Repetitive movement is very good at changing the altered state. And there is an author named Julia Cameron. She wrote a book called The Artist's Way. And after that, she has several other books. And I think one of the title I'm thinking of, though I can't remember it, I think it's called Walking the Water, I believe is what it's called. But it's a book all about walking and how walking can be used to achieve the altered state. And for her, the goal was creativity. It was to be able to write. She's a screenwriter. And but for anybody, it can open up that more creative aspect of you. So you definitely want this type of walking, running, hiking, though, to be intentional. I would recommend not being on a device during it, really setting an intention that I'm doing this as a spiritual practice, and maybe even set an intention, like something you want to be thinking about or contemplating about as you do it. But that could be highly effective. Kundalini energy exercises is another great way. So, Kundalini energy exercises are repetitive movements that are designed to move large amounts of energy in the body, dislodge stuck and stagnant energy, and that can be very effective. So, a simple movement like this, which is the shoulder. The spinal twist is where you put your fingertips on your shoulders. As you twist a little slightly to the left, you inhale, and as you twist slightly to the right, you exhale, and then you set it up as a repetitive movement. So it's like inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. And you do that for a minute or 2 minutes, and that can be very good at breaking up stuck and stagnant energy in the body, but then also bringing you into the alpha state or an altered state of consciousness. So, after Kundalini, or sorry, I shouldn't say Kundalini, after body movement, which is a form or technique to use to get into the altered state, we can also do breath control. So, breath control is another technique that's really accessible for people. You just need to be taught the breaths. And once you know how to teach, or once you know how to do them, they're very easy, they're simple, they don't cost any money. So, breath work can be excitatory or it can be inhibitory depending on the breath that you're using. So, if you want to use an inhibitory breath, you want to slow your breathing down. So, the easiest thing to do is to lengthen the exhale, and it's usually best when you're doing this through counting. So, on the inhale, you would count for a count of 4. And then on the exhale, you'll do a count of 6 or even 8 if you can double the exhale. And so, what this does is it immediately brings down the central nervous system. It's inhibitory, like I said, because it's bringing the energy down, and it slows our brainwave patterns naturally, which helps us get into the alpha state and then takes you into a deeper state of consciousness. So that would be what I would recommend if anybody wants to try like an inhibitory breath, is try a count of 4 in and an exhale of 8 out. Now, there also is excitatory breathing. This would be a faster activating breath. The breath of fire is the classic one. I want to demonstrate a variation of the breath of fire. I was literally on a webinar right before this where someone was demonstrating a breath which he called, and this was Dr. Joseph Levry, and he was demonstrating a breath which he said is like anti-aging, and it can ward off death and in old age and things like that. It's an energizing breath. It moves large amounts of energy in the body. It purifies the system. It breaks up stuck and stagnant energy, and then it will, through that process, then because we're sort of stressing out the body, we return to this even deeper, more relaxed state, and that's what helps us get into the alpha state. So the breath is very simple, and it's like breath of fire if anybody's ever done it. You just put your hands on your heart. I like to use Garuda Mudra when I put my hands on the heart like this. Just take the palm of the right hand, place it on the back of the left hand. The fingers are kind of splayed like this. Interlock the thumbs together. Place it on your heart. So this is a mudra that taps into the heart chakra. And then from there, you're going to do these staccato exhales through an O-shaped mouth. So it looks like this. And you'll feel this pumping in your belly, which is very similar to the breath of fire. If you do that breath for 30 seconds up to a minute, you can even slow the breath down if you want to take it a little bit longer, if you want to go more like 2 or even 3 minutes. But very purifying of the mind. And again, breaths like that make it easier to enter this altered state of consciousness. And the other thing I wanted to mention before we move to the next technique is that breath control, you can also do really incredible things with suspending your breath. So if you can, let's say you can raise a bunch of energy through a breath like the one I just demonstrated, like And let's say you do that for 30 seconds to a minute, and you're raising all of this energy. And then when it's time to sort of send your energy out into the universe, you suspend your breath. So you take a really deep inhale and you draw all of that breath and that energy up into your body. And I like to think of it as like letting it percolate in the body. You're letting it sort of build up and build up and build up. And that breath suspension is is helping you with your energy raising technique because you'll feel it building inside of you. And then eventually you'll need to exhale. And as you exhale, you can imagine directing that energy to the object of your intention or to your intention. So if your intention is to, draw in money, as you release that energy out and you exhale finally and you let that energy go, you can even send it to an image of yourself receiving money, or visualize yourself and what you would look like if you were abundant and weren't worrying about money. And you can do this for any technique that you want. So it's a very good, breathwork's very good at altering the state of consciousness, which is going to make your magic more powerful, but itself can be used as an energy raising technique during your spells and your rituals. Um, Okay, so next up, yeah, and if anybody has any, if anybody's tried any of the techniques, has any feedback of how they've worked for you, if they've worked or haven't worked, we'd love to hear from you guys. So put them in the chat. So the next technique is isolation. Now, isolation is an inhibitory technique that you do have to use with caution because it can be pretty intense. And usually, with isolation, there's some idea of silence. And that silence, those long periods of silence that are intentional, can alter the brain chemistry. So I'm just going to briefly tell a story about my first yoga training that some of you have probably heard. But we did an exercise in silence, and the idea was that it was one day during the training, you were to wake up and not, from the moment you woke up to the moment they told you you could speak again, you were to not use your voice, to not use any form of communication whatsoever. So they even said, like, if you don't know how to get to the training center, like download the instructions, the directions the night before, because you don't even want to use a GPS or anything like that. Don't turn on the radio in the car. When we got to the training center, everyone was silent. And it's really kind of like you were told to not even make eye contact because that's a form of communication. And so, in some ways, you enter the state where it's like no one's looking at you, no one's communicating with anybody. It makes you feel a little bit like you're a ghost, like you've crossed through the veils or something. And that's the idea behind it. Because as you cut off one aspect of your expression or your senses, you you will turn more internally, and that's the idea behind it. But sometimes people, this is why I say using caution, because if people have a lot of problems at that time, it can amplify them in some people. And we actually had a person who was in the training with us who kind of had a bit of a mental break during the exercise, which we only did for, I think, about 8 hours. But during that time, she left the training. Something kind of came up, and she had to go home to process it, and she never came back. So it's definitely important to sort of see where you are mentally and emotionally before you try this. But it can be very eye opening. And what happened to me is 8 hours into it, they start to bring us out, and they started to do an Om bath, and they would just chant Om, Om, Om over and over and over again. And at one point, the instructor says, and she says, pull back the veils. And and I should say the most important part of the story is that we had a partner, and we were sitting and we were doing eye gazing with this partner. And so I'm staring into this woman's eyes, and we're holding hands. And when the instructor says pull back the veils, the woman's face in front of me began to shift and change. And it reminded me of the book at the very end of Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, when he starts to see like all of these images in the face before him that he's looking at change. And I believe I saw this woman, her face transform into all of the lives that she had lived in the past and all the lives that she would live in the future. And I saw her as an old woman and an old man and a young child. And I began to weep. And then she started to weep. And I thought that we were seeing the same thing. I thought she was seeing it in me. I thought it was the point of the exercise. And after the exercise was over and we began to talk again and share, and I started sharing with other people, I discovered that nobody else in the room had had this experience except for me. Something about the silence, something about the isolation moved me into the right state of consciousness that I literally, when the instructor said, pull back the veils, I pulled back the veils and I saw through them. And I could see the secret of the universe, which is that there is no separation between any of us. And for me, that was a very eye-opening experience. But silence can help you get there. And so for those who are really interested in something like this, you can get instruction in it. And there is something called Vipassana, Vipassana. And I'll see if I can find a link with some more information. I'll put it in the chat later or below the video later. But Vipassana meditation and meditative retreats are places where you can go where everyone is going to do this, where they're going to be living in silence for a period of days. And you can live in these retreat centers and have this experience with them. So something to consider, because it really is a technique that can alter your state of consciousness, but at the very least, you can try something like I did, where it was intentional silence for a certain period of hours. Okay, so moving on, the next technique is intoxication. So this is another one, and I will say for these last three techniques, these are the ones, especially this one, using caution with this. It can be inhibitory or excitatory depending on the substance that is being used. Like I said, you want to use it with guidance and with training, and it should be intentional. This isn't just like taking anything recreationally. It's for a ritual or a spiritual reason. Like I said, at the very least, we want to use caution when we do it, but it could include things like ritual wine, which can be infused with certain herbs. It can be taking tinctures or herbal mixtures. One herb that is especially good for altering consciousness is mugwort. You can find mugwort sticks bundled together. Sometimes the mugwort is also called black sage. And if you find a stick, an herbal stick with mugwort, you can burn that during your ritual, or you can swirl that around you. You can inhale some of that smoke, and that can alter your consciousness ever so slightly. Other herbs that are kind of good in ritual space for altering the state of consciousness is kava, as well as damiana. And those can also be infused into ritual wine. You can use slight hallucinogenics, THC in very small, in the right dosage. It's not used recreationally for this reason, but for this purpose, but used to alter your state ever so slightly. It makes it easier for you to kind of be between the veils, which is where the etheric plane is where our rituals take place. Also, just simple incense. That's the point of incense. Sometimes people don't really understand what incense is about. Incense is to bring about an altered state of consciousness, and that's why we choose certain fragrances. I shouldn't say fragrance, because to me, that implies like it's synthetic, but we use certain smells and certain herbs to alter our state of consciousness. So the idea with all of this is that just enough of this substance can open up a doorway to the unconscious, but too much will not be the right choice. So moderation is key. And then, of course, for anybody who has any substance abuse issues, this may not be the technique to use. But maybe using incense, of course, or like herbal sticks, but you may not want to be consuming any of the herbs or any of the substances. So you have to use your own caution, but it is a technique that can absolutely change your state of consciousness. So another one that people don't often think about is sex during magical practice for a magical tech as a mind altering technique. So This can be done alone or with a partner. It is an excitatory technique, which means it excites the system, and a great amount of energy can be raised. So it can be used as an energy raising technique, which is what sex magic is about. Now, it's especially if you are someone who already practices tantric yoga and you know how to do certain techniques, or you're somebody who's been doing kundalini energy techniques. This technique also, you'll tend to find it easier to do this because you've already been sort of training your body through doing the kundalini energy and exercises and moving that energy through your body. Now, orgasm is a means of raising energy. It may not be the right choice for everybody. Some people may be like, don't want to do that. I don't want to try that. But I wanted to offer all options because like I said in the beginning of the video, there are sometimes there are techniques that we don't even think about. We've never even heard about. And so knowledge is power, right? When we have all the information in front of us. So that is another technique. And then the final one I wanted to talk about, again, it's not a technique that I personally use myself, but it's a technique, is pain. It's an excitatory technique. It excites the system. Anybody who's done a lot of piercing, has gotten tattoos, a lot of tattoos like I have, knows that there is this meditative altered state of consciousness that happens when you're under the tattoo gun, especially a long piece that's being done. I've done enough of them that I know there's that meditative technique, or that meditative state that we enter, that altered state. So another idea that would fall under this category is scourging, which is light ritual whipping. And I think that with this technique, they always say in the books, like when Christopher Penczak talks about the different techniques to alter your state of consciousness, and he talks about this one, he always says, it's use caution with it, especially if a person is someone who has a history of self-harm. We want to make sure that we are not using techniques that have like there's another underlying reason behind it. So another example would be like fasting can be a really good way to get into an altered state of consciousness, but someone who has had a history of eating disorders is definitely going to want to use caution with that and understand what is really happening with the technique. Are they choosing the technique because they think it's the right technique for them, or are they choosing it because it feeds into the eating disorder? So the same kind of thing with pain as a technique of altering consciousness. With a person with self-harm history, are they choosing that technique because it's the right technique for them, or are they choosing it because it feeds into that part of them who has engaged in self-harm, that part of them that might not be healed yet? So food for thought, right? And a lot of different techniques, and they can definitely be stacked together. You don't have to just choose one and only do that. You can alternate on different days. I would be practicing changing my state of consciousness on a regular basis. That doesn't mean every single day. It doesn't have to be every day. But maybe on every other day, 3 times a week, picking a technique where you're going to alter your state of consciousness so you start to learn how to move in and out of it very easily. And perhaps you do one technique on one day, a couple days later you do a different technique, or maybe you just dive into one and you practice that one and get really good at it. Like I said, you can use a combination of the techniques, like meditation paired with breath work and some incense, and there we have 3 consciousness altering techniques all together as one, right? Or we might use body movement with some chanting and some music. And so as we start to change, and maybe you could add in breath work there as well, right? So we could start to stack these practices. Now, I wanted to, before we move into the Q&A, I did want to say that if you're having trouble entering the altered state, try repetition for a while. Try to use the same incense. Try to listen to the same music during ritual. Try to wear the same clothing or the same jewelry, because for your ritual, because what happens is it teaches the mind what to expect. When I put on that outfit, when I put on that necklace, when I put on that song, when I burn that incense, I expect ritual. And so if you're having trouble, like this is a technique I use just anyway, but especially if you're having trouble, with entering that sort of altered state or that meditative ritual state that you want to be in, try the repetition for a while and see if that helps. Okay, so I am going to move into our Q&A now. And Jamie put Vipassana in the chat too, so it's spelled there for anybody who wants to check out Vipassana meditation. Kurt said a good time and place is after it snows, and when you go outside, it seems like sound just disappeared. Yeah, that's an interesting thought too, is trying techniques like sound in different environments too, and seeing how that changes. It's really can be eye-opening how things are different when it's cold or when it's snowing or when it's hot or you're on top of a mountain or you're near the ocean, and see how the techniques change depending on where you are. Okay, so I'm going to move into the Q&A. I have a few questions that were left for me, and I'm going to do those. Anybody who's with us live, feel free to drop questions in the chat. They don't have to be about witchcraft, shadow work, energy work. It can be sorry, they don't have to be about altering states of consciousness. They can be about anything: witchcraft, shadow work, energy work. And if you are watching back and replay later, you can put your questions in as well. I go back later, I answer the questions, or if I think they're ones that more people would benefit from hearing the answer to, I will include them in next week's episode. Okay, so the first question I have here is from Melinda, and she said, does it bother the trees when I talk to them in the cold winter weather? I have a practice of greeting trees in the front of my building at work. Should this be a time of year to just let them rest? So it's a really good question. I think that we sometimes, because we are animals, we don't quite understand plant consciousness, and it's a very different consciousness than ours. They don't feel quite the same effect as we do. Not to say that they can't feel pain and they can't feel emotions, but they don't feel them quite in the same way as we do. They are, especially like trees, things that live much longer than we do in this physical plane. It's just a totally different state of consciousness. So I don't think that would be anything wrong with greeting them in the winter time. It's a state of all of us. We all kind of go into a resting state during winter time when things get colder, when the light changes and there's less daylight. But we certainly don't get disturbed when someone greets us, even though we're kind of in that more resting state either, right? So the trees don't get disturbed by being greeted or being talked to during the winter. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. One of the things I wanted to show, though, is this is a very old book. I don't even know where it came from, who gave it to me. I mean, it's probably written in the 70s or something. Let's see. Can I even see here? 1972 it was published. So this book is The Secret Life of Plants, and it is by Peter Tompkins. So you can see this is a very old copy. I think it probably came from a library book sale. But it's a really interesting book. On the back of it says, eye-opening, astonishing, fascinating, leaves you breathless. Don't miss this one. So it's just an interesting book about the consciousness of plants. And if you are interested in kind of understanding the consciousness of specific plants or trees around you that you have relationships with, you can even ask them what it's like to be in kind of a more of a resting state. What's it like to have that kind of energy? And it may not be energy that we can necessarily understand, because again, we're animals. It's a totally different kind of consciousness, but we get a better idea of what plant consciousness is when we connect to them meditatively. But I would check out this book. It's very dense. It's very small writing, but I haven't read it in like probably 20 plus years, but I do remember it being very good, and it was very eye-opening. So The Secret Life of Plants. Okay, so I hope that helps. Next question is from Jess, and Jess said that, how can I shield myself from being so deeply affected by all of the horrible things happening in the world right now? She said, sadness, fear, disbelief, losing hope. I want to stay grounded so I have energy to take action in whatever small way that I can, but I'm also so sad and drained. So, looking for some, ideas, thoughts on, how do we shield ourselves from the energy, but at the same time have the energy to take action if we want to and if we need to. So it is a big challenge for empaths to navigate and to find the space between feeling what's happening and being able to shield ourselves from it enough that we don't get bogged down by the negative emotions. Because when we get swept away by the sadness and the fear and we start to lose hope, it means that we are one less person who can take action, and we're one less person who can do something to affect some change, right? But what I will say is that when we're going through some really difficult times, it energetically in the universe, in the world, we should be able to take the time we need to process it. So if people need space to cry, to retreat, to be sad, totally, we want people to have the space to do that. But then to also not get so swept away in it, that's the fine line. So how do we find that balance? So I think that one of the things that's most important, and it's just over and over and over, we'll say it, is self-care. So we want to make sure that we are practicing self-care as we're processing difficult emotions and we're watching difficult things happening around us. Making sure that you reserve, I talk about the 5 minutes for magical or spiritual practice, but when we're really in a tough time, trying to spend more time in our self-care can be even more beneficial. Working to balance our chakras, working with grounding techniques. This can all be part of our self-care because we're basically working with our own energy so that all of the bad stuff is still outside of us in the world, but at least we're moving our own energy so it's not getting stuck and stagnant in the body. And that is going to be a big asset to us, right, as we try to navigate through a challenging and difficult space outside of us. The other thing is, remember that it is not our burden. It's not your singular burden to bear. It's not for any one of us to carry all of it on our shoulders. And sometimes as empaths, we think that we're put here to kind of feel all these emotions. And while there's an element of that that's true, uh, it is it is not in your best interest to be feeling everybody's emotions all the time, and to be feeling all the emotions of the world or people around you and carrying that. It's just not going to be in your best interest. So at some point you have to find a way to work through some of that. And if you think about, like, I think about some of these like highly ascended masters of, in Tibet, right, practicing Tibetan Buddhism, and they sit on the top of these mountains and they meditate and they find spiritual bliss and connection to deity or whatever is outside of them. And in many ways, they've let go of the cares of the world. They've left that behind because that kind of energy actually detracts us from our spiritual ascension, our spiritual evolution. Now, the complicated thing for many of us is that we want both of those things. We want to be involved and to help in a cause or a need, and we also want the spiritual ascension. And so we have to find kind of a place in the middle where we can live in both worlds. And one of the things that we can do is, when the emotions get so challenging, like I said, remember, it's not your burden to bear all of it, is to try a technique that I call breathing emotions into the heart space. And the heart is very purifying. It's like an expansive ocean. And so when you are getting full of all of the thoughts of the negative things that are happening and the sadness that's weighing you down, you can kind of go into a light meditative state. You take a really deep breath, and instead of pulling away from the pain, which is what we always do, there's this slight kind of like clutching away from it that we do because we don't want to experience it. Instead, you lean forward into it a little bit and you breathe very deeply and you pull it into the heart space. And you imagine your heart like an ocean. And the pain and the sadness is just like a drop of water that you drop into the ocean. And just like any drop of water in the ocean, it combines with the ocean, and before you know it, it's gone. It's disappeared. And your heart has that same ability to dissolve that pain and to basically, I don't want to say eradicate it, but at least to help soothe it a bit. And so if you try this technique, at first you may not feel like you're getting much headway with it, but if you try it when you start to really feel overwhelmed with the pain, I've tried this when I've lost loved ones and I'm just overcome with grief and guilt, or about maybe things that I could or should have done or things like that. Just really breathe that energy rather than pulling away. Lean into it, breathe it into the heart space, and then as you exhale, just imagine the ocean just washing it away, and it just dissolves into the ocean. So that's one technique to try. The other thing is to find community. You'll find a lot of grounding in community. People are coming together for good causes and good reasons. And I will say that our own coven is going to be doing a working in January. We don't have the details ironed out yet. We are going to open up this space for this ritual to anybody who would like to attend with us, anybody who's concerned about some of the things that are happening right now, especially if you or someone you know feels like you need protection, and is feeling very uncertain about what's going to happen. We would invite people to join us for this ritual. So if you are somebody who thinks you want to come to that ritual and you're not in the coven and you're not in Shadow Seekers, reach out to me, because I will make sure that you get an invitation to that ritual, because we'd love for people to join us. And like I said, we don't have all the details ironed out, but we want to do some kind of a working to sort of counteract some of the energy that's in the world right now that is leading people to feel unsafe and unprotected. So I hope that some of that helps. Know that you are not alone, Jess. A lot of people are feeling it too, myself included, and spaces where people can come together and talk about it are important, and also your own self-care. And then finally, I have a question from Debbie. She said, how do you know if you can move energy? So everybody can move energy, literally every single person. And so one of the probably the easiest things to do is to do some energy raising techniques. And so one of the things that you can do is just simply rub your hands together very vigorously and raise some heat between them. This is like a kinetic energy that we're raising. And then you bring your hands apart like this, and then you try to push them together. And some people will immediately start to feel a tingling in the hands. It will feel like there is a ball of energy. It's a little harder to move your hands together. So that's one technique of feeling energy. But absolutely anybody can move it. You can draw it up from the earth into your body, into different parts of your body. As you start to work and deepen your experience with your chakras, you get better at moving the energy through the different chakras. And you can also move energy from yourself to other people, and other people can send energy to you. But absolutely everybody can move energy. And so I would just try energy raising techniques like this, some of the Kundalini energy exercises. I will also drop a link below where we have an episode on energy. And you might find it very helpful because there's some energy raising techniques in it. And I'm not seeing it right now, though, so I may have to do this afterwards when I can get in and find it. I can't find it right now, but I will absolutely drop that episode in the chat as well for anybody who wants to check out some more energy raising techniques. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the chat and let's see if anybody has any other questions here. I feel like I'm maybe not seeing all the questions. Okay, I don't think I see any questions here, but there is some issue with the chat tonight. So if I've missed people's questions, I am going to go back in right after this. And if I've missed anybody's questions, I will answer them. So let me just tell you what's coming up next week on 11/26. I think that we're going to be approaching the dark moon. We'll be right in the waning crescent. So we're going to talk about shadow work and energy work for the waning crescent moon. That's next week on 11/26. And then on 11/27, we have a special workshop, Intro to Shadow Work for Witches, Empaths, and Spiritually Minded People. So this is a workshop that I give one time a year. And it tells you, basically teaches you what shadow work is and some techniques that you can use to get started with it in your life right now. And so those of you who've already taken the workshop, feel free to come again every time that I teach it. I teach it a little bit differently. I show different exercises usually. And for those of you who have never taken the workshop, you're in for a treat because for a whole hour and 15 minutes, I think is what it is, I'm going to teach you as much as I can about shadow work and how to use it in your life and how to combine it with energy work to get the best benefits from it. So we will also afterwards be opening up our Shadow Seekers membership for those who kind of watch these videos and come to these lives and you really want to take it to the next level, consider joining us in Shadow Seekers. That is going to be opening up immediately after that workshop on 11/27. So you can look for some posts and some emails if you're on our mailing list over the course of the next week. So you'll get the Zoom link to come to that free workshop on the 27th, Intro to Shadow Work. And then you'll also get information about how to join Shadow Seekers. And we have a really nice Black Friday offer this year. And then after that, the following week on 12/3, I'll be doing an episode on creating sacred space. So we have a lot of good things coming up soon. And I'm going to sign off for tonight, but I always enjoy spending Tuesday evenings with you guys. Always a pleasure to be here, even on the days like this where the chat doesn't seem to be cooperating with me. But leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the video if you like what you hear. It helps us get it out to the feed of more people. You can leave questions and comments, even if you're on replay. I'll go back and answer them later. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, Body, Mind, Witchcraft, and that way you will not miss a single episode. All right, until next time, blessed be.